Well, hello, friends and neighbors from around the world. Sid High here with a sermon about masks. Why a sermon on masks, you might ask? Well, it's because something as simple and effective as a mask became a huge propaganda tool. Let's talk about the mask for a second. I'm not a doctor or an expert on masks, but here is my understanding of how they work and a little about my experience with them. When I worked in IT for a hospital, it was not uncommon to have to troubleshoot an issue in the surgery department. To do this, you had to dress out just like everyone else in the operating rooms or sterile hallways. And the mask had to stay on, even in an empty room that had been sterilized and ready for the next patient. The reason you had to wear the mask was to keep the germs in your breath from contaminating the room. Without the mask on, I seem to recall that a deep breath can cover 6 feet. Now, can some of your breath get out of a basic mask? The short answer is yes, but they mitigate the risk down to a minimal area. So the mask's job in this scenario was to mitigate the spread of germs, which even a basic mask does extremely well. But what if you're walking into an ER full of people without masks that are coughing? Here you wear a mask to keep from breathing in the germs that are floating in the air. Basic masks are pretty good for this, but you really need better masks, say an N95, etc., to really mitigate this risk. Then came the pandemic. There should have been no controversy about the benefits of wearing a mask, but Trump was sometimes for, but mainly against wearing them and gave all kinds of reasons that made about as much sense as injecting bleach. But I understand how now, after studying propaganda, it's not supposed to make sense. Causing chaos and confusion keeps people agitated and easier to manipulate. But by this time, if you were a Trump supporter, the facts no longer mattered. Manufacturing chaos and using this as a wedge issue only strengthened Trump's base. Prejudice supersedes logic. This especially took off after the federal mandate to wear masks came out. So what was so terrible about this mandate? Here's a little of what Wikipedia says about it. After Biden was sworn in as president on January 2021, his first executive order included mandating the wearing of masks on public transportation systems and more rigorous enforcement of COVID-era health and safety protocols, including masks on federal properties. The most common argument against this I heard at the time was, this is government overreach. Really? Refrigerator trailers were being used as temporary morgues. Hospitals were converting every floor they could to be intensive care, isolation units, and still not enough beds, which I was involved in some of that. Emergency rooms overrun with patients. The list goes on. Again, prejudice supersedes logic. So why would someone or some group start a propaganda campaign against wearing masks? It seems absurd, I know, but propaganda isn't supposed to make sense, just the opposite. It is to confuse and divide people. And if the propagandist sees that the propaganda is working on something as simple and straightforward as a mask to turn people against one another, they know they've got the followers right where they want them, so they will believe even more outrageous lies and misinformation that the propagandist feeds them. Again, prejudice supersedes logic. This is how to manipulate and use undue influence, otherwise known as mind control, to radicalize a group. Which brings us to ICE. But first, two things. As I brought up in Sermon 36, the Biden administration worked with Republicans, specifically Senator James Lankford, to draft an immigration legislation, if I'm not mistaken, had almost everything the Republicans asked for in it. It was projected to pass, but Trump called Mike Johnson and told him to kill the bill because he wanted to run on the immigration problems, and this bill would address too many of them to still run on it. So that's what Mike did, and the propaganda news machines hid it under the rug. Side note, after I posted Sermon 36, some responses basically said, prove it, as I didn't include documentation about the bill in that sermon. On the positive side, wanting verification of the facts is a good thing. On the other hand, the commenters could have looked it up themselves, but questioning my statements casts doubt on what I stated, even though it's true, and they want their base to be as confused and uninformed as possible. So here it is, Senate Bill S-1444, Border Patrol Enhancement Act, was introduced by Senator James Lankford on May 4th, 2023. But congressional Republicans walked away from it early this year at the urging of GOP presumptive presidential nominee Donald Trump, who was not supportive of the bill because he is centering his re-election campaign on immigration. And how is it that these commenters are so concerned about immigration that they didn't know about this when it happened? They are in information silos, and as I said before, the propaganda news machine hid it under the rug. Second, remember that an expired green card is a misdemeanor, just as jaywalking is, with a fine of $100 and up to 30 days in jail. A large portion of illegal immigrants simply have things like expired green cards. In the past, these were not the people that ICE was focused on. During both Republican and Democratic administrations, ICE focused on deporting illegal immigrants that had committed crimes or people that came here illegally with no paperwork. ICE had trained law enforcement agents that could enforce the law, arrest, and deport these individuals with minimal impact to the public at large while upholding the Constitution. Those days are gone. It seems that today there are many ICE agents that are unqualified and or not properly trained for the job. Or are they? In prior administrations, both Republican and Democrat, these agents would never have made it or been fired for their actions. But this seems to be exactly the kind of agents this administration wants. The laws they are breaking and the unconstitutionality of their actions is far worse than the laws that the illegal immigrants have broken. But this administration not only defends these actions, but actually encourages this lawless behavior. And yet, there are still large numbers of people that support this, even though it goes against everything America stands for. How is it possible? Say it with me now. Propaganda. They have been manipulated to the point where they will support this administration no matter how lawless it is, and still believe that they love their country and believe themselves to be true patriots. It is hard to put into words how effective sinister propaganda is. When I started writing this, the killings in Minnesota had not happened yet. And I was going to end with something like this. So the federal government enforcing wearing a mask in a few crowded public areas to try and slow the spread of a pandemic was government overreach. But unmarked, masked federal agents disregarding our laws and Constitution, kidnapping and dragging people in unmarked vehicles, arresting people that may or may not have been here illegally, is something that the same people that screamed about the mask mandate totally support. Propaganda goes hand in hand with cult characteristics. Trump knew he had a cult-like following when he stated that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any supporters. He was somewhat correct because there have been 2 killings, and yet there are so many people that are still trying to defend this and still support him. Just like Jim Jones, David Koresh, Ron Hubbard, the list goes on, Trump is a cult leader and his followers would kill for him. Some of them, I should say. I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm not. And this is why I say this. This is why it's so important to learn about cults, propaganda, and mind control. In Stephen Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, Stephen states that while he was in the Mooney cult, he would have killed his own parents if Moon had told him to, even though he still loved his parents. This is where we are at with the cult of Trump. It is hard for me to express my anger at the moment. We should all be angry and demand that those responsible be brought to justice for their crimes. From the bottom to the top, we need to continue to speak out and protest this. I will not vote for any candidate that is not willing to prosecute these people to the fullest extent of the law. But the cults will not go away quietly, and they will try to manipulate anyone they can. That is why it is so important to understand propaganda techniques so that you can identify the techniques when they are being used on you. So again, my advice is to read the books Crystallizing Public Opinion and Propaganda by Edward Bernays and Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan so that you can educate yourself about what we are up against. We can get through this, but we're going to see a lot more heartache and pain before it gets better. And it won't get better unless we continue to act. So if you are tired, confused, bewildered, angry, that is the effect of the propaganda campaign. Understanding propaganda lessens these effects. We must continue to hope, but hope without action will get us nowhere. Let us do everything we can to learn about propaganda techniques so that we can purge this evil from our country and the planet. Amen.